Thank you very much. Thank you. Hi, yes, I'm Nikolai Elkins, Program Director of Creative Education at the University for the Creative Arts. Just to check, you can see my slides. They're all up on the screen. That's correct. Fab. Yeah, and today I'm going to be looking at how ChatGPT could be used to evaluate unit briefs or project briefs, assignment briefs, using ChatGPT instructions, custom instructions. And I should add that everything that I will be exploring today can be applied to things like handbooks, descriptors, session plans, probably much more, I'm sure of it. But most importantly, I want to be doing this through a constant focus on equity, inclusivity, diversity, and accessibility throughout. I want to start by thinking about acting like a prompt engineer, because last week I was working with my PG Cert students and we were discussing prompt engineering, and often I hear that ChatGPT spews out nonsense, and what I often find the problem is that you fed it nonsense. So this activity gave them 10 questions to guess what was in the box, and I told them that it was a recipe, and they asked some questions. Is it a main meal? They asked whether it was vegetarian, a stew, a curry, and they just descended on into guessing. So what I ended up doing was I ended up putting these responses into ChatGPT's DALL-E to create that, and it is certainly a little confused. And what this was aiming to do was to highlight that importance of prompt engineering. Had they asked for the ingredients of the dish, beef shank, bone broth, green onions, garlic, ginger, and so on, it might have become easier. In fact, there was nothing actually stopping them from simply asking, what is the name of the dish? They entered the task drawing on preconceived notions of the rules of how it should be completed, none of which I gave them. They went for yes, no answering questions, and as a result, they didn't arrive to the answer of Taiwanese beef noodle soup, which is what it was. So today I want to talk about how we can prompt for inclusivity when using ChatGPT, considering how we can avoid assumptions, bias, and patterns both we and machines recognize. So in the first instance with this, I was experimenting with ChatGPT's capability to evaluate a unit brief for its effectiveness. And I looked to see what it would do with just the simple prompt to act as a validation panel member at the University for the Creative Arts and evaluate the attached unit brief. And the output from default GPT-4 model focused on relevance, learning outcomes, content structure, and delivery, and so on. The focus is quite generic. It gives a comment, it appraises what's there in general terms, and the content isn't awful. But this type of unsupervised learning, where ChatGPT has analyzed these vast amounts of text, learning to predict the next word in a sentence, it highlights some of the core issues of using generative pre-trained transformers, these GPTs. The process being inherently discriminatory because it's deciding which data are of value and its weight and how valuable that is. And what that transformer model is doing is using an attention mechanism to weigh that importance of each word in a sentence when predicting the next. And in my first response with the unit brief, inclusivity and accessibility barely made the cut in the response. So the question then becomes, how do we prompt for inclusivity? And first, we need to ensure that our GPTs have understanding of context in which we want and or need them to respond. So if we need inclusivity, we want it to be responding with that context, we've got to ask for it. We've also got to suggest the kinds of patterns we want it to notice. We may consider addressing any knowledge cutoffs by supplying relevant information, which may be, for example, up-to-date quality assurance information. And I'll be doing all of this through the use of custom ChatGPT instructions. Now, custom instructions, they're not new, but they enable you to include specific preferences or criteria for how you want ChatGPT to, how you want it to take things into account whilst generating its responses. And I like to think of this almost like method acting for ChatGPT. We're giving it a character, a voice, a history, perhaps even an identity. And my first step in doing this is to create a validation panel of experts who are able to comment on various aspects of the curriculum. And I started here with the student voice, and I asked ChatGPT to create a profile for a level 6 fashion design student, including an associated profile picture. So here we have Alex Taylor, white Western. His designs look very Western. They seem to have a natural flair for the discipline, it explains. He's a natural leader. And this is where we first stumble into this issue of creating a custom identity for ChatGPT, this default pattern recognition of that pre-trained transformer. We see a perpetuation of privilege, the heteronormative, the neurotypical, the white, the male. And in fact, actually, Alex is so masculine that Dali gave him 2 Adam's apples, actually, in this example. So moving still to how do we then prompt for that inclusivity, I've now included 2 additional parts of my original prompt. The first then in asking for an intersectional approach to take into account recognizing different forms of social stratification, thinking of things like race, class, gender, sexuality, age, ability, and others, and how they all overlap, especially in the context of oppressive institutions and social systems. And then finally highlighted there is representational harm, referring to how people's identities are shaped and then influenced by certain widely accepted ideas, could be misconceptions or stereotypes, which are then created and or spread through various forms of representation like media or advertising. So what we have next is a profile that highlights Alex as a non-binary individual. They are multiracial, they have autism, and Alex navigates these multiple intersecting social identities, breaking gender norms and incorporating sensory-friendly materials into their designs, reflecting an understanding of the varied needs and experiences of different groups, including those with sensory sensitivities and disabilities. So we have this profile for the kind of person we want ChatGPT to respond as. We now need to think of the how. How are they going to respond? So our prompt here is using that information, using that profile that we just went through, outlining clearly the topics that Alex may wish to comment on during a validation panel, and again, taking an intersectional approach to their responses. And in this example, we've got things that are being prioritized are inclusivity again, accessibility for diverse learning needs, including neurodiversity, amongst many other things. So what we need to do next is pop that into our custom ChatGPT instructions. So we're going to train ChatGPT now to act as Alex. So I'm programming those 2 things that we've just produced in. And now anything I do in ChatGPT 4 moving forward, it will be acting as Alex. I'm going to start by putting in that unit brief. I've put it in as a text prompt. I could also attach that as I could attach it with the paperclip icon in the bottom left. I could also attach my my handbook, should I want to. At this point, I'm going to ask it to act as Alex and give a comprehensive commentary on and review on the following unit brief as part of a validation panel. And then we have that being produced through next. I'm not going to make you sit and watch ChatGPT write, don't worry. So at this point, ChatGPT, acting as Alex, is now programmed to respond in very specific ways, giving comments on the inclusivity, diversity, and accessibility of the curriculum. But not only that, I've also got there prompting for some solutions and some suggestions for how this could be improved further. Now, when building courses or putting reading lists together, actually in particular, the one thing that comes up as an issue and that kind of gets questioned a lot is the diversity of texts being used. This is something now that Alex can support us with. So being able to prompt for a wider range of cultural perspectives within the reading list and supplying some links to those sources as well. Now, the possibilities for this are really quite limitless. I've got Dr. Martinez on the left, head of teaching and learning, who is passionate about creating an accessible, inclusive educational environment for all. Dr. Vaughan, a director of school and leader in the field of sustainable fashion, loves commenting about sustainability within a program. Finally, we have Mike, who is head of quality assurance, strong advocate for championing culturally responsive teaching methods, who's also trained to use sector recognized standards and subject benchmarking statements in his response. Now, when I first introduced our panel in a talk last week, besides the uncanny valley being mentioned within these images, the most common comment was that just how attractive everyone was on our panel, somewhat flawless, in fact. So actually, with that in mind, I did ask ChatGPT DALL-E to use the profiles of each validation member and create photorealistic portraits, photographs of each person, still ensuring that there is no representational harm within the image, focusing this time on the realism of the person, highlighting human-like flaws in their appearance. And this is what we get instead. Still a beautiful panel of members, I would say, but perhaps further away from stereotypes and representational harm still. And what this concludes is really on the caution of using generative tools to give us perspective on our resources. The reason why we introduce validation panels is to have the individual voices all giving their input. And while the responses that we've generated from that example with Alex are still limited, they're still generative, the process, I think, invites us to think about how we prompt for inclusivity by thinking like prompt engineers. These flaws, they're deviations from perhaps a perceived norm, but they're also originality and creativity, and they define many principles of what it means to be human. And I've emphasized this so much on this topic of evaluating resources with the use of custom instructions, because I really believe that the only way really for us to get real value out of this is to take an intersectional approach, to consider representational harms and to acknowledge the complexity of humanness and even our own limitations to think computationally, which is why we did that activity in the first place right at the start. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
What an amazing talk. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. I'm blown away. It's so good. And you touched on so many important points there. I don't know where to start, if I'm honest, but if you have a question, if you'd like to raise your hand, I don't think there's anything that's come in on the Q&A. Just while you're doing that, I think for me, it was kind of really refreshing just to see. I mean, you've obviously put a great deal of time into learning how the systems work, tweaking it and things like that. And I think that's just one, I think that, we can only recommend that to people enough, is just to start playing with these tools to see what they can do and see what they can do and what they can't do. And I think having you here, Nikolai, is so great, because you're giving people that step up, aren't you, in terms of kind of things to look out for. And I think that was fantastic. But for me, I think it's so valuable to kind of hear your story, but also just to reminding everyone, I guess, that it's these tools that's what they are. They're tools to help you. It's not kind of taking over from other jobs. It's there, and I think it just points stuff out. And as someone else mentioned already today, it's removing that blind spot in some cases, and it's giving you that information straight away before it goes any further. So it's, yeah, amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's I would add, this is custom instructions. We're moving on to GPTs now in terms of functionality, and there's possibility to train a validation panel, which is something that I started with doing, is being able to create your own custom whole ChatGPT model. So there is you can have all these different people interacting with resources, and something that was kind of highlighted here is it's still recognizing patterns, it's still creating bias, but you can control the bias that you create. Yes. So if you want it to have a bias on inclusivity, prompt exactly for that bias and ask it to recognize that pattern.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you.